The number one way is to evoke emotion. That's what all of our content does. And I know that's really an odd way of thinking about it, but emotions are what drive decision making.
You're listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast with your hosts, Ryan Klein and Chase Williams, the go-to podcast for learning from the experts in the legal community about effective ways to grow and manage your law firm.
Welcome to another episode of the Legal Mastermind Podcast. This is your host, Ryan Klein. I have with me, as always, Chase Williams. And today, our guest is Julie Holton of mConnexions. How's it going, Julie?
Great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. So, we're excited to talk today. And it's going to be sort of a series of podcasts that we have upcoming. It's a lot to do with marketing trends in 2020. And we definitely anticipate 2020 being quite the year of marketing changes, especially digital marketing changes. So today, we're going to be covering a couple of the trends that we anticipate this year. And we're looking forward to discussing. So to start, Julie, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So I like to say my first tour of duty was actually working in TV news. I was an executive producer, writer for about 12 years before I left that industry and went into marketing. I was then the legal marketing director for a law firm in Michigan for about 5 years before launching my own agency, now marketing agency called mConnexions. And we are a full service firm that takes this approach of solving solutions for our clients who are looking to generate new leads. So a lot of that tends to focus on digital marketing, which of course is one of the emerging trends that we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, great. I'm glad you led us up to it. That is without a doubt our subject for today, and we're looking forward to it, especially with your background and with your industry focus.
Well, I'm excited too, because oftentimes I know there's this kind of push-pull relationship when it comes to technology and emerging technology when we're talking specifically about law firm marketing, because lawyers, the legal field is so deeply rooted in tradition. And so I know for a lot of people listening, that's something that you have this kind of love-hate relationship with, is how do we push forward without being pulled backwards? And so kind of navigating that fine line is something that I think is fun to talk about.
So I think the first thing that we wanted to start off with is definitely diving into voice search and kind of picking your brain, because I know that you have a background on that. We were discussing that a little bit prior to starting the podcast about that being a huge opportunity for all sorts of law firms, big, small, B2C, B2B. So what's kind of the state of voice search and what's the trend that people are anticipating?
The interesting thing with voice search is that in 2019, experts had predicted that it was just going to grow exponentially, but it grew even bigger than the numbers that they had thought. So we knew it was going to be big, and it ended up being even bigger. But think about how often in your day-to-day life you're using voice search, whether you're talking into your cell phone instead of typing, whether you're asking Alexa for something. We're using voice search more and more. And when it comes to businesses and when it comes to law firms specifically, we have to keep in mind that when people are searching to find out about our services or about our people, that they're using voice search. And voice search changes the way people are searching. So right now, when you go to Google and you type in a question or you're looking for something, you have a very specific way that you write that out. And right now, all of our optimization for search engines is based on those keywords that people tend to write. Voice search changes that because we speak differently than we write. So now we really need to take a look at the content on our websites and start modifying that content so that it reflects how people speak.
So yeah, I know that people are definitely changing. Well, the way that they search when they use their voice is, of course, it's much different. So I think that you were kind of talking about how content may kind of change possibly to cater to those kinds of searches. Is that where you were headed?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess like even stepping back a bit, for people that aren't familiar with voice search, we've got Alexa, we've got Google Home and Siri, right?
Right.
It's interesting because I'm just starting to get, used to asking Google for things that I normally wouldn't ask Google for outside of like, hey, turn the lights off.
Right. Well, it's interesting too. So think about one of the things that people ask Google or Google Maps for is directions. And I can give you an example from several years ago when I was at a law firm and we had an issue come up with Google Maps where Google was not recognizing the correct location of one of our main offices. And people were ending up going down the wrong way on a one-way road and then on the wrong side of town. And you can imagine the problems that started to create for us, because every time someone would use the app on their phone, it was specific to the app on their phone, they'd use the Google app and they'd end up in the wrong place. And so we had to work really hard to fix that, because the last thing you want is someone with the wrong directions, let alone no directions, and to end up on the wrong side of town, and they're late for meetings and obviously upset. And so if you think about that in the context of voice search, what if you're not being found because you're not using the correct terminology for Google, Alexa, Siri to recognize what people are searching for and how it relates back to you? These are all things now that we need to think about, and we need to think about it on the front end of our websites with the content we're using so that it's readable for the people, but also on the back end of our websites and how these things integrate together to make sure we're communicating with the search bots as well as with the human people who are the users who are interacting with our websites.
I think this is kind of a great start to kind of get on the mindset from the B2B angle, because I know that when we started talking, you know that we mostly work with B2C. Our listeners that have been listening to us for a bit know mostly B2C. And we've done a little bit of like research and understanding of the B2C, how a consumer might use voice search when it pertains to the legal industry. So from where we're standing, we think of voice search as when people are asking Alexa or Siri or Google, who's the best family lawyer in my area? What do I do after DUI? How much will I get for my back injury settlement? Like we kind of deal with that, and we've surrounded a lot of our content with that, but we don't know about the B2B angle as much, how it relates to the content being created and how it also further caters to the voice search aspect of it. So how do you kind of view those kinds of inquiries or voice inquiries from the B2B? What's your experience with it so far?
That's such a great question. And what first comes to mind for me is that behind every business, you still have consumers. You still have people who are a part of those businesses. And so if a consumer is performing a search in a certain way, then chances are when you're talking about, the B2B, the business that's searching for another business, you still have the people who are performing those searches. So for example, when we're talking about the content that we're using, the language that we're using, one of the trends for 2020 is conversational language. And that also ties in with voice search because we use conversational language when we're performing those voice searches. But if we look just at the conversational tone and the language being used, even though we tend to think, a business is going to be super professional and everything needs to be just the right lingo, and it does, you still have a human user, a person at the other end that's representing that business, that's performing the search. And what speaks to them? Other people. And so it still needs to be relatable. It still needs to be conversational. And all of that ties back in with the voice search. Also, voice search, because it's so important, it has become an important part of Google's algorithm. And so even if you're thinking to yourself, well, people aren't going to be asking Alexa about my law firm or about my practice, maybe that's true. But the algorithm is still designed for people who are using voice search. And so you still have to play by the rules. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
And with these algorithm changes, I think another trend that is really unique for law firms to pick up on this year is what we're calling zero position with SEO. The number one position used to be the most coveted position. When you'd open Google's search engine page and Google search page and you'd search, lawyers near me, you want your firm at the very top of that list. So that's number one position. Zero position is now a place where it's this featured snippet that aims to answer whatever questions being asked without actually having to scroll through or look at any of the search results. And so this is now the new highly coveted position because what Google's doing is it's taking the most asked questions or the information that's most searched for online and turning those into these feature boxes. And I think especially for law firms, when you're in the business of providing that expertise and being able to digest and then make sense of the law, that position is going to be one that is going to become highly competitive for law firms, but also highly coveted because it's going to be the number one position. It's really hard once you get into that position to be knocked out.
So mentioning the featured snippet, I think it's generally understood in the SEO community, and I don't want to make this podcast like really crazy or technical with SEO as much as I'd love for that to be the case. But oftentimes for the featured snippet, is it typically contingent on doing some level of structured data to be able to set up your page to be able to come up for a featured snippet, or can it also just come up on its own by providing the best answer for the topic being searched?
The answer is both. Like the answer is yes. You can do both. So obviously having that technical back-end structure in place is really going to help you. But if you are not techie at all, that's okay, because really you can provide all of that data within a simple blog. As long as you structure it with bullet points and you have all of that information contained within your content, Zero Position really is looking to provide some sort of informative, relevant, like quick answers to a question. And so if you can do that within a blog, and we see that happen all the time where you just have a really strong blog with a lot of data, and Google will choose that as Zero Position.
I remember when I first saw Zero Position, I was looking to bake something, and I sent Ryan a message. I'm like, have you ever seen this before? This is pretty amazing. And it was like literally a picture of, I think it was like cooking like a chicken or something, and then all the steps just right in front of all the other search results. So it's awesome that, you know, we're seeing this transition into businesses and into law. It's pretty remarkable.
It really is. And it gives law firms an opportunity and marketers an opportunity to say, okay, what are people searching for that's relevant to our law firm? And what can we provide then as those answers? And really, at the end of the day, a strategy to develop a series of blog posts is all you need to own that Zero Position.
How many blog posts do you recommend?
That's a really great question. You know, more so than the number of blog posts, I have strong opinions on the quality and what you're including in those blog posts. So I think it's more important to look at, let me think of how I want to say this. When I talk about what you're including in the content of the blog post, I think sometimes with law firms, we really walk this fine line between making sure we're including every single detail. And of course, every word matters because every word means something. But also we need to look at how is that coming across to our readers? Do they understand what we're writing? Is it conversational in tone while still being authentic to the professionalism and the polish that we're looking to showcase? And so what I think is important in how law firms are approaching content is this transition into having more conversational pieces. And that is a really, it's a really unpopular approach to have. And I understand, you know, being in the law firm world for 5 years, I get it. But I also know what consumers are looking for. And we want to make sure that we're meeting them where they are and giving them what they're looking for. So when it comes to SEO, yes, there are the more often you blog, the better. The longer the word count at this point, you know, the better. The way you're structuring the blog post is important. You know, all of these technical things are important. But when it comes down to your human users and how you're connecting with your audience, I think it's much more important to focus on what you're saying in your blogs and how you're saying it instead of how often you're saying it. One way that law firms, I think, can capitalize on using blog posts is incorporating video, incorporating graphics, finding different ways to tell the story of what it is they're trying to convey in different forms. Things like video are going to play much higher in the algorithm, even including a podcast or an audio version. If you have someone who doesn't want to go on camera, that also will help as well. So I think thinking outside of the box about how you're creating your content is really going to help take your efforts even farther.
Hopefully this isn't too much of a loaded question, but how do you kind of come up with a blogging strategy and like the topics and the approach for B2B? And are there any nuances now to approaching it a little bit differently because of voice search? Cough.
That's my answer.
Oh, really? That was good. I'm wondering because we could, you know, from where we're at, our agency can go on about a B2C content strategy forever. I don't know really the first thing about the B2B. So I don't know if it's still the same like keyword research. I don't know if you're still looking at trends. I don't know if it's based off of questions or FAQs in the past. Because I feel like, because there's more cases being handled, more practice areas, typically many, many more lawyers on average, there seem to be unique opportunities. So I frankly don't know how the strategy differs and how it takes voice search into consideration as well.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think we're going to see a lot of this continue to evolve over the next year or the next several years as voice search continues to change the content. One prediction I have, I think voice search, when people perform voice searches, they're looking for quick, easy, short answers, which completely goes against our strategy right now and how it relates to, SEO. It also really changes for law firms the approach that they're taking when they're writing their content, conversational versus, really detailed and elaborate blogs, for instance. When it comes to selecting topics, I don't know that all that much has changed. Looking at trends, looking at keyword research, all of those things are still important. It would be great, and when we're starting to be able to collect more data on what searches are being performed by voice versus, other searches. But as of right now, I think selecting the topics is still pretty similar. It's how we're wording the content once we've chosen the topics.
I never thought about that before. Does that mean that, I don't even know. This is just really a question. Have you seen any data? Like, is there anything projected to be rolled out for analytics for Search Console about showing how people search differently via like voice search versus mobile versus desktop? I'm not even aware if that's a thing yet.
I am not either, but I would imagine that somewhere there are some kids who are much smarter and forward thinking than me that are, dreaming this up, because it only makes sense that we're going to be able to find a way to track this. I don't know that there's a platform that exists right now to be able to really drill down into those analytics. That gets outside of my wheelhouse.
I just thought, just randomly popped in my head. I have no idea. It's certainly going to start. I know comparative to other forms of search, it's not there yet, but the way things are trending, it's going to be there, and the data is going to be invaluable.
Well, and it's really interesting too to look at what automations will be coming following voice search. Right now you can ask your phone for directions and it'll respond and say, would you like to call? Would you like directions? It has that kind of next step automation built in. What are the next steps beyond that? I think that will be really interesting to see as well. How does this start to automate some of the processes that we're putting into place?
Definitely. And then in turn, how does it tie into the other marketing initiatives that are going on for the firm?
Absolutely. We talk about cross-servicing across different practice areas, for instance. So if someone performs a voice search, are we able to put in a prompt that then asks them if they're looking for X, Y, or Z? Or are they looking for facts? Are they looking for a specific attorney? What kind of prompts can we then put into play to help cross-service and cross-market across our firms?
Do you think that the future of consumer experience, I'm not trying to go too far off topic, I'm starting to realize how many directions and how interesting this is. But as far as like client experience or customer experience, we've all done voice prompts, like automation, mostly when talking to banks and mostly when talking to airlines, and both of them are very frustrating in my opinion. But do you see that kind of being a thing for kind of like B2Cs or B2B, like smaller companies, like answering questions almost like a bot on a website does?
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? To think that could be coming down the pipeline. I don't know. I think as we talk about all of this technology, it's also really important to remember that people still want to connect with people. Well, no matter what industry we're talking about or what type of marketing tactics we're using, it all comes down to connection and how are people connecting with other people. And so I think that as we talk about technology, keeping in mind authenticity, keeping in mind how to make those genuine connections is still really important. So, we're definitely seeing a rise in bots, but will that impact us to the point of taking out some of those human elements? I don't know. It's still really important for us to humanize our marketing.
Okay. So that being said, let's talk about kind of your expert background on content marketing itself, and with consideration to what you're talking about, the human element and the conversationalist element. So what do you think is a great way for B2B firms to be more conversational in their content? If they're not talking to a person from the firm just yet, but they want the human element as much as possible on the website and learning about them, what are some ways that you accomplish that?
Bear with me here, but the number one way to accomplish that is to evoke emotion. That's what all of our content does. And I know that's really an odd way of thinking about it, but emotions are what drive decision making. Even people who think they're the most logical of people and make all of their decisions based on fact are actually basing those decisions on emotions of some sort. Emotions are what humanize us. They're what connect us. They're what compel us to make a decision. So even when we're talking about B2B and we're talking about maybe a business hiring a law firm, for example, we're still looking at the individuals within that business who are looking to hire an individual or a team of attorneys. It's still people connecting with people. And so you do that by creating an emotional connection. And I don't know, is that something that you do when you approach your marketing? I know it's sometimes an odd concept. Some people are just like shake their heads and they're like, yes, I get it. But when I worked in news, we talked about that all of the time. What are the stories that we're looking to tell? Why do people care about these stories? We might think this is big news today, but why is my audience going to care? How do I get my audience to watch this story? And why am I telling this story in the first place? It's the same thing when we're marketing our businesses. Why do people care? Why do we want them to choose us? Why are we better than our competitors? And we answer that why in the way that we're writing things, the way we're communicating. And we do that through emotion and finding a way to connect to our audience.
Yeah, we definitely do the same thing. We're a strong believer that once we started introducing anecdotes to content, that it made a huge difference from our clients approving the content and perceiving it as higher quality, and then also people staying on the page and reading more from the beginning because the introduction kind of drew them in more than it would otherwise.
Yes, absolutely. That does not surprise me at all. And when we talk about how can law firms do this, I'm not saying that you need to fill your pages with all of these emotional anecdotes, but you can bring in emotion. I mean, emotion is more than just happy, sad as well, or angry or whatever. You can bring in testimonials. You can have other people talk about you, how they felt, how you helped them. All of these things can evoke emotion. Video is a great way to do it because you're actually seeing someone face to face. That eye contact is there to really humanize it and pull them in. Like you said, being able to tell anecdotes or have stories, case studies, success stories of how things have worked. All of this is a great way to really have that conversation and make the connection.
So one final question. If someone really wants to put some emotion into an article or a blog, what's a great topic to focus on? If they're going to, a lot of lawyers don't like to write. So if they had to write something, what would that topic be around?
I look at what is the outcome you want after someone reads a blog, for instance. What action are you wanting them to take? When you look at what action you want them to take, then you think about what emotion would be connected to that action. What's going to drive them to take an action? For instance, let's take a topic that might not seem like something with emotion. Maybe we're looking at employment law and there are some changes, IRS governing updates, something coming out, some alert coming out. At first glance, yes, your clients need this information. You're going to send it out in some sort of blog or email alert. But what is the action they need to take? What do you want them to feel in order to read this, to open it? It may just be that there's something new that they need to know about. So the feeling might be to evoke some urgency that they may need to take action or they may need to reach out and contact you. So as you're writing, make sure that they know right away that they're going to need to take action on what you're about to tell them. And so oftentimes, instead of kind of burying that in the middle or putting it at the end, call us and we'll help you, put it up front. You may need to pick up the phone and call us about this latest alert that's come out. And so just kind of looking at, you can write the whole blog in the way that you would have normally written it, but then look at it again with a different lens on of what action do I want my audience to take and how am I getting them to take that action? And especially if they don't read all the way to the bottom of the blog where I actually spell it out for them, do I need to spell it out sooner?
I completely agree. When I mentioned that the introduction to anecdotes, it's the first paragraph. I think that people are kind of used to being more personal and conversationalist all the way at the end at the call to action, frankly. And then everything before that leads up to it is oftentimes very factual, informative, and all that is nice, but it's not, the human element doesn't even come out until it's at the end. Like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in this age of DIY. Everyone thinks they know everything already because you can just Google it, right? And so we want people to know right up front that they still need to connect with us, that we can still help.
Yeah, I think that covering the human element, the conversational element of content and how it pertains to voice search has been great. If anyone wants to reach out to you to learn more about how they can work with you to do what we've discussed on their own website, what's the best way to reach you?
Best way to reach me is through email. It's julie@mConnexions.com, and that's mConnexions.com. You can also go to our website, mConnexions.com.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys. This was a great conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Mastermind podcast. If you're interested in working with Ryan and Chase, please email mastermind@marketmymarket.com. Make sure to join the free mastermind group for growing and managing your firm at lawfirmmastermind.com. Ryan Klein and Chase Williams are the managing partners at Market My Market, one of the top legal marketing companies in the United States.